The steward found me at the war table with his cap crushed in both hands, and I knew before he opened his mouth that something in my hold had slipped its mooring. "My lord," old Havard would not lift his eyes to mine. The healer asked the stableman for a horse, saddled and provisioned, for first light. I set down the quill I had not been using. The border maps of Kelvin lay open under my hands, the marriage lines drawn in a clerk's careful ink, and for 10 years I had made a study of keeping my face a shut door. I kept it shut now. "Which healer?" I said, though there was only one who could make the fire in the grate feel suddenly distant and cold. "Mara, my lord." The name went through me, the way the north wind goes through a man on the wall, clean, without mercy, finding every seam. I had heard that name 1,000 times in 10 years, spoken by the sick and the grieving and the newly whole, and I had trained myself to receive it the way a stone receives rain. I received it now, and the training held, and behind it the whole of me came apart in a silence no one in that room could hear. "She gave no reason," Havard said, "only asked would the roads north be passable, and paid the stableman from her own purse for the provisioning, and would not let him wake me." He turned his cap. "I thought you should know before she was gone, my lord. That is all. I thought you should know." I told him he had done right. I told him he could go. I do not remember which words I used, only that they came out level, because a king who has buried half his people learns to speak levelly over any grave. When the door shut, I sat a long while with the maps and did not see them. 10 years. She had come to Brackenhold in the worst winter of my life, when the red fever was in the walls and I was burying wolves faster than the ground would take them. My father's generation and half of mine, my sister's husband, my own second, men I had bled beside on the Kelvin line. The healers we had were dying with the rest. And out of the white road, half frozen, came a woman I had never seen, with a satchel of roots and a voice you had to lean in to hear. And she asked me, not my counsel, not my captains, me, where I kept my worst cases, so she could begin there. I had no reason to trust her. I let her in because I had nothing left to lose, and because when she looked at me across that stinking hall she did not look at a king or a monster or a man too hard to grieve. She looked at me the way you look at another tired person, and she said, "You should sleep, or you will be the next one I lose." No one had spoken to me like that since my mother died. I did not sleep, but I remembered it. I have remembered it for 10 years. She did not save all of them, no one could have. But she saved enough that Brackenhold did not die that winter, and by spring the ones she pulled back from the dark would not hear a word against her. She stayed. She never asked to stay. She simply did not leave, and I never gave the order that would have made her, and that became the shape of us, a woman who never asked and a king who never told. Because here is the thing I have never said aloud, not once in 10 years. I loved her from that first hall. Not gently. Not the way the ballads mean it, all sighs and windowlight. I loved her the way a burned field loves rain, with a kind of desperation I was ashamed of, because I had no right to it. I was the man who had let his pack sicken. I was scarred to the collarbone from the fever I survived, and better men did not. And she was the clean thing that had walked into all that ruin and made it live again. What could a woman like that want with the ruin itself? So I said nothing. Year on year I said nothing. I watched her hands over the sick and I said nothing. I sat across from her at the long table on the nights the whole ate together, and I made my face a shut door and I said nothing. And I told myself that keeping her near and silent was a finer thing than speaking and watching her flinch. A coward's arithmetic. I know that now. I did not let myself know it then. And into that silence, 3 months ago, came Kelvin. The border we had bled over for 2 generations, offering peace. Their old lord dead, his daughter ruling in his place, and a treaty on the table that would end the raids that had cost me my second and my sister's husband and 40 years of Brackenhold's young men. The terms were plain and they were fair, and they were the kind of thing a king does not have the right to refuse. An alliance sealed the old way by marriage. Lady Odile of Kelvin and the Alpha King of Brackenhold. Sign and the border sleeps. Refuse, and in 5 years I bury more wolves in the same cold ground. I had told the envoys I would sign at the turning of the moon. That turning was 2 nights away. I had not told Mara. I had not told her anything, because there was nothing in 10 years I had ever told her, and I did not know how a man begins. But she was a healer. She heard everything the hold said, and the hold, God help me, had been saying it for weeks. The king weds the Kelvin lady at the new moon. There'll be a Kelvin banner over the gate by spring. She had heard, of course she had heard, and she had gone to the stables and asked quietly for a horse. I understood it then the way you understand a wound only after the blade is out all at once, and too late. She was not leaving because she was called elsewhere. She was leaving because she could not stand in my hall and watch me put another woman where, for 10 years, she had thought she would never be allowed to stand. She was leaving because she believed my silence had been an answer. She had read my shut door as no, and she was too proud and too kind to make me watch her stay for it. 10 years I had told myself my silence protected her, and all it had done was teach her she was nothing to me. I was on my feet before I had decided to stand. There is a thing I have never had good words for, that happens in me when she is near. Since the plague winter I have carried a cold in my chest like a second heart, a hard, held cold, the cold of a man who has decided not to want anything again, because wanting is how you get more graves to dig. For 10 years only one thing has thought it, and that thing is the sound of her voice in the next room, the knowledge that she is under my roof and breathing. I had grown so used to that small daily thaw that I had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing the fire until someone opens the door on the snow. Standing there with Havard's news still in the air, I felt the cold come back all the way, the whole 10 years of it, arriving at once, and I understood, finally and completely, that I would rather burn the Kelvin Treaty and take my chances with the border and the graves than live one winter in a brackenhold she was not in. That is not a thing a king is supposed to feel. I felt it anyway. I went to find my sister first, because I have never in my life made a decision that mattered without Ressa telling me I was a fool for it, and I wanted to hear it before I did the thing regardless. She was awake. She is always awake, my sister, since the fever took her husband and left her the hold's accounts to keep. I found her in the counting room with a candle and the tally sticks, and she took one look at my face and set down her pen. "Who died?" she said. "No one." I stood in the doorway like a boy. "Mara asked for a horse. She's leaving at dawn." Ressa did not look surprised. That was the first blow. My own sister not surprised. "Yes," she said quietly, "I imagine she is." "You knew?" "I know she spent 10 years mending this hold like it was her own blood, and I know that in 2 nights you're going to stand in the great hall and give it to a stranger from Kelvin, and I know Mara has more dignity than to be here to watch it." She folded her hands. "I'm not surprised, Torin. I'm surprised it took her this long." "It's a treaty," I said, and heard how thin it sounded. "It's the border it's 40 years of." "I know what it is." Her voice was not unkind, and that was worse than if it had been. "I'm not telling you the treaty doesn't matter. I'm telling you that you've had 10 years to say one true thing to that woman, and instead you're going to let her ride into the snow believing she was never anything to you, and then you're going to marry a lady you've met twice, and you're going to call all of it duty." She looked at me the way she looked at me when we were children, and I had done something proud and stupid. "You are the bravest man I know on a wall, brother. And you are the greatest coward I have ever met in your own heart." I could have struck a man for less. From Ressa I took it, because it was true, and because under it, under the shame of it, something was coming loose in me that had been welded shut since the plague. A door I had kept barred so long I had forgotten it was a door and not a wall. "If I break the treaty," I said, "the border wakes. More of ours die. You know that better than anyone." "I do." Her eyes were wet and steady. "And I buried my husband on that border, so don't you dare use my grief to talk yourself out of your own heart. There are ways to keep a peace that don't cost you your life, Torin, if a king is willing to be clever instead of just obedient. But you'll never find them sitting here calling your cowardice duty. She picked her pen back up, which was how she told me the conversation was over. Go to the stables. It's not dawn yet. It was not dawn yet. I went down through the sleeping hold, past the hall where 10 years ago I had buried a winter, and out into the cold, and every step I took I argued with myself like two men. One of them was the king, and the king knew the arithmetic of borders and the weight of a treaty and the graves that a broken peace would cost. The other was the man who had loved one woman in silence for a decade, and that man had run out of arithmetic entirely. The stable was warm with the breath of horses. And she was there, of course she was there, hours early, because she had never in 10 years been able to sleep before a hard thing. I had learned that about her the way you learn scripture, without meaning to, until it lives in your bones. She was checking the girth on a gray mare with her back to me, her cloak already fastened, her whole small, careful life packed into 2 panniers, and the sight of her ready to go through my gate and out of my world stopped me in the doorway with the cold roaring back into my chest full force. She heard me. She always hears everything. She went still, not the way prey goes still, but the way a person goes still when the last thing they wanted has walked in, and she did not turn around. My lord, her voice was very even. She had practiced it, I think, the way I had practiced mine. 2 people who had spent 10 years making their voices into shut doors. You should be asleep. You have a long day before you, a breath, and a longer one after. Mara, I had rehearsed nothing. 10 years and I had rehearsed nothing, because I had never let myself believe this moment would come. And so I stood in the door of my own stable with my hands open at my sides like a man who has forgotten what hands are for. You asked for a horse. I did. She still would not turn. Her hand rested on the mare's neck. I have kin in the far north I've not seen in a long while. It seemed a good season to go before the pass is close. Every word of it careful and reasonable and completely a lie, and both of us knew it and neither of us said so. The hold has good healers now, better than when I came. You won't feel the lack. I would feel the lack, I said, of you every hour of every day until I died. The mare shifted. Mara did not move at all. And I found, at last, that the door I had kept barred for 10 years was already open, and everything behind it was coming out whether I willed it or not. I have loved you, I said to the back of her in the horse-warm dark, since the winter you walked in out of the snow and told a broken king to sleep or you'd lose him too. I have loved you every day since and never once had the courage to say it, because I was the man who let his people sicken, and you were the one clean thing that ever came into that ruin, and I could not think of a single reason on this earth that you would want. She turned around. 10 years I had made my face a shut door. Hers, I saw now, had been a shut door too, and it was open, and what was behind it undid me where I stood. Because it was not surprise. It was not pity. It was the same thing, the exact same thing, that had been eating me hollow for a decade, looking back at me out of her eyes as if it had been waiting there all along. You fool, she whispered, and her voice broke clean in half. You unbearable, silent fool. Why do you think I stayed? Why do you think I stayed? I had no answer. 10 years and I had never let myself ask the question, because I had already decided what the answer was, and the answer was duty, or nowhere better to go, or the sick still need her. Anything, any reason on earth, that was not the one now standing in front of me with her voice in pieces. I thought, I started and stopped, because whatever I had thought was too foolish to say to her face. You thought I stayed for the work. She laughed, and it was a terrible small sound, wet and disbelieving. For the fever and then the mending and then whatever came after. You thought I was a healer who found a hold that needed her and simply took root. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist, quick and rough, the way she does when a patient is dying and she will not let them see her grief. I stayed, Torin, because on the third night of that winter you came into the sick hall to sit with a boy who was going to die, and you held his hand so he wouldn't be afraid, and you did not know I was watching. A king. On his knees on a filthy floor, holding a dying stable boy's hand so the child wouldn't go into the dark alone. Her breath shook. I had come from a place where the strong did not do that. I had never in my life seen a powerful man be gentle when no one was there to be impressed by it. And I thought, God forgive me, I thought, there is the reason I came all this way and didn't know it. The mare shifted between us. Neither of us moved to it. So I stayed, she said. And I waited. A month, I told myself. He is grieving, give him a month. And the month passed and you said nothing, and I told myself a season, he has a hold to rebuild. And the season passed, and a year. And you sat across the table from me every night with your face like a closed gate, and every night I looked for one crack in it, one look that lasted a beat too long, and I never found one because you are the most disciplined man alive. She shook her head slowly. 10 years I read your silence, Torin, and I read it the only way it could be read. That you were a good king who let a useful healer stay, and nothing more, and that I was a foolish woman for wanting the moon out of a winter sky. You were not foolish, I said. My own voice had gone to gravel. You were right about everything except the one thing that mattered. The look was there, every night. I trained 10 years to keep you from seeing it. She stared at me, and something moved across her face that was worse than the tears, a kind of grief for all of it, all the wasted, silent years, hers and mine, two people starving at the same table, each certain the other was full. You trained yourself, she said softly, to keep me from seeing you love me. Yes. For 10 years. Yes. She sat down. Just sat on an upturned feed bucket in her traveling cloak, as though her legs had simply declined to keep holding the weight of it. We are both such fools, she whispered. We are the two greatest fools in the North. I crossed the stable and knelt in front of her, a king on his knees on a filthy floor, and I thought distantly that it was fitting, that this was where she had first decided to love me, and it might as well be where I finally learned to deserve it. And I took both her cold hands in mine, and for the first time in 10 years, I let her see the whole of my face with nothing barred behind it. Not the greatest, I said. The greatest fool in the North signs a treaty in 2 nights that gives his heart to a stranger, while the woman he loves rides out his gate believing she was never wanted. And I am not going to be that fool, Mara, whatever it costs. I am done being that fool. Her hands turned in mine and gripped. The border, she said, because even now she was thinking of the hold before herself, and that was the whole of who she was and the whole of why I loved her. Torin, the Kelvin piece. If you break it, the raids come back. Ressa's husband, all those years. You cannot throw that away for you, I said, watch me. But even as I said it, I heard my sister's voice in the counting room. There are ways to keep a peace that don't cost you your life, if a king is willing to be clever instead of just obedient. And I understood that Mara was right, and that loving her did not free me from the graves on the border, and that a king who bought his own heart's ease with his people's blood was not a man she could love anyway. She had told me as much without knowing it, 10 years ago, watching me kneel by a dying boy. The gentleness was the thing, not the crown, the gentleness. Listen to me, I said. I am not going to trade one grave for another. I am going to keep the peace and I am going to keep you, and if there is a way to do both, I am going to find it before that moon turns, because I have wasted 10 years being obedient, and I have exactly 2 nights left to be clever. I pressed her knuckles to my mouth. Will you unpack that horse, Mara? Will you give a foolish king 2 days to prove he learned something? She looked at me a long moment. Then she pulled one hand free and laid it flat against my scarred cheek, the fever marks I had hidden from every mirror for 10 years, and she did not flinch from them the way I had spent a decade certain she would. 2 days, she said. But Torin, if you cannot find your clever way, you will still let me go. I will not be the reason boys die on that border. I would rather cross the north alone than be a wound in your people. Do you understand me? I love you enough to leave you, if leaving is the only honest thing left." "I know," I said. "It is why I can't let you." I did not sleep. I do not think she did either, though we parted at the stable door like two people who had been handed something too hot to hold, neither of us daring yet to close a hand all the way around it. I went to Ressa. I woke the council, and I did the thing my sister had accused me of never doing. I stopped being obedient and I got clever. Here is what I had been too much of a coward to see for 3 months, while I let the treaty carry me toward a stranger's hand like a log toward a falls. The Kelvin envoys wanted peace. They wanted the raids stopped and the border trade opened and the fear off their farms, the same as I did. The marriage was the old way of sealing it, the way our grandfathers would have done it, blood-binding land, because no one at that table, myself least of all, had been brave enough to imagine a newer one. A marriage is a hostage with a prettier name. It says, "I will not raid you because my son is your grandson." But there are other hostages a king can give that cost him nothing but pride. By the gray of that first morning I had the shape of it. Ressa drew up the numbers. She had run this hold's accounts through a plague and could find peace in a ledger faster than I could find it on a field. A sworn peace, not a wed one. Bracken holds grain to Kelvin through the lean years. We had the harvests now that the fever was behind us, and they had the salt roads we lacked. A joint watch on the passes, our wolves and theirs, so no raider of either side could work the border and blame the other. And for the binding, the thing that would tell Lady Odal's council I meant it. My own sister's son, Ressa's boy, my heir until I had one of my own, fostered a year at the Kelvin court, honored, not held, learning their tongue and their ways, a bridge of a child instead of a cage of a wife. Ressa offered him before I could ask. He should see more of the world than one snowed-in hold, she said, dry-eyed now, all business. And it will do the peace more good than your wedding ever would, brother. A marriage binds two people. A fostered heir binds two courts. It was a better peace than the marriage. That was the shameful, freeing truth of it. It had always been the better peace, and I had never reached for it, because reaching for it meant admitting I did not want the marriage, and admitting I did not want the marriage meant admitting why, and I had spent 10 years unable to admit that to a stable wall, let alone a war council. My cowardice had nearly cost my people the better bargain. Duty, I had called it. Ressa was right. It was fear in a crown. Lady Odal came to the hall at midday when I sent for her. I owe you the truth of her, because it would be an easy and an ugly thing to make her a villain in this, the cold rival who deserved to be cast aside, and she was nothing of the kind. She was a young woman doing her dead father's duty as gravely as I was doing my father's, sealing a peace she had not chosen with a man she had met twice, and if she felt any joy at the prospect, I never saw a flicker of it. When I told her plainly, with my counsel as witness, giving her the respect of the whole truth, that I could not in honor wed her, because my heart was 10 years given to another, and she deserved a husband whole and not a man split down the middle, I watched her face very carefully, braced for anger. What crossed it before she mastered it was relief. "My lord," she said when she had her voice, "I will be honest with you since you have been honest with me. I did not want this marriage either. I want the peace. My people are as tired of the raids as yours." She glanced at the treaty on the table, at Ressa's new pages beside it. "If you can give me a peace my council will sign that does not cost either of us our lives, I would take it, and gladly, and go home to a border that sleeps and a bed that is my own." We signed the sworn peace 3 days later. Odal rode home with an honor guard of my best wolves, my nephew riding proud at her side to begin his fostering, and a treaty that was, by every measure Ressa could total, worth more to both holds than any wedding. She and I parted not as jilted lord and lady, but as two young rulers who had, between them, been braver than their grandfathers, who had found a way to stop the graves without either of us becoming one. At the gate she took my hand plainly and said, "I hope she knows what she waited for." And I said I would spend my life making sure she did. And Odal of Kelvin smiled. the first true smile I ever saw on her, and rode into her own good future. And I have never once from that day to this thought of her with anything but gratitude. I found Mara on the wall at dusk, where the healers go when they have lost one and cannot yet face the living. But she had lost no one that day. She was only standing in the cold with her face to the north road she had almost taken, and when she heard my step she did not make her voice a shut door any more. She had stopped doing that, I think, the moment I knelt on the stable floor. Neither of us would ever do it again. "It's done," I said, coming to stand beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched, a thing we had never once in 10 years allowed ourselves. "The peace is sworn. Better than the marriage would ever have been. The whole council says so, and they're right. No one dies on that border for this, and no one weds for it either." I looked at the road she had meant to ride. "You can put the horse away for good, Mara. Or keep it and ride it in the spring, and I'll ride beside you, but not out my own gate in the dark. Never that." She was quiet a long moment. The wind came off the snow and found every seam in me, the way it always had, but the cold in my chest, the hard-held cold I had carried since the plague winter, the cold that had only ever eased when she was near, that cold was simply gone. Not thawed. Gone, the way winter is gone when you finally notice it has been spring for a week, and you were too busy living to mark the day it turned. 10 years, she said at last, softly to the north road. "We could have had 10 years, Torin. I know. You knelt by a dying boy and I fell in love with you across a room full of the sick, and neither of us said a word for a decade." She shook her head, and there was grief in it still, but under the grief something was surfacing that I had waited 10 years to see her turn on me without a wall behind it, a warmth, plain and unhidden, terrifying and ordinary as sunrise. "Promise me something." "Anything. It is the only word I seem to have left. Promise me we will be the kind of fools who waste no more of it." She turned from the road, finally, all the way, and faced me, the healer who had walked out of a killing winter and mended a broken hold and a broken king, and asked for nothing in 10 years but a horse to leave on. "I do not need a crown, Torin. I never wanted to be your lady for the title of it. Half this hold has called me theirs for years, and I already have the only thing that name would give me, which is a home. I only ever wanted the one thing you kept behind that gate. Give me that, and say it to me every plain day, and I'll not waste another hour of what's left." So I told her. I have told her every plain day since, and I mean to tell her every plain day I have. But that first evening on the wall I said the whole of it, the 10 silent years, the boy on the floor, the cold in my chest and the way she'd carried it for a decade without knowing, the coward's arithmetic I'd finally thrown away. And when I ran out of words at last, she put her hand once more against the scarred side of my face, the side I'd hidden from every mirror and never once from her, and she pulled me down out of the wind and kissed me, plainly. "The way you finally set down a weight you have carried so long you forgot was not part of you. The hold married us before the passes closed, not to seal a border, not to bind 2 courts, for no reason of state at all, which is, I have come to think, the only good reason there is." Ressa stood witness and wept and pretended it was the cold. The stable boy Mara saved that first winter, a broad man now with children of his own, gave her away, because there was no one living with a better right. And when the old healer who had trained under her for 6 years asked, quietly, whether she'd still keep her place in the sick hall now that she was the king's wife, Mara laughed and said she'd sooner give up the ring, and went back to her patients the next morning. And I have never loved her more than I did watching her walk into that hall a queen and kneel on the floor beside a fevered child, exactly as she had the day she arrived. There is a gray mare in my stable still. We never sold her. Some spring mornings, when the passes are open and the hold can spare us a day, Mara saddles her and I saddle mine, and we ride the north road together, the road she once meant to take alone in the dark. And we ride it out and we ride it back, and every time we pass through my own gate returning I take her hand, and neither of us has ever once needed to say why.